Baudet had learned a few tricks of his own from his father. He knew of an ancient oil that could break the hold of his father's charm. One night, while Baba Olumide was away on spiritual seclusion, Baudet set out to act upon his plans. The hut was dimly lit, with the flickering flames of a few dying candles casting erratic shadows across the walls. The air was heavy with the scent of bitter herbs and incense. Sade lay motionless on the mat, her body still under the grip of Baba Olumide's spell. Her eyelids fluttered, and she stirred slightly as if in a trance. Baudet crept inside, clutching a small vial of ancient oil in one hand. His gaze lingered on Shade's face for a moment before he began to pour the oil over the charm on her wrist. As he whispered the incantation, he felt a surge of power course through him, the kind that sent a chill up his spine. It was a dangerous power, the kind that demanded a price. Sade awoke with a start. The fog that clouded her mind began to lift, and she became acutely aware of her surroundings. The memories of what had happened hit her with a terrifying clarity. The rituals, the magic, and the way Baba Olumide had taken control of her. "What's happening?" she whispered, her voice trembling as she tried to pull herself up. Baudet watched her closely, his expression dark. "The spell is breaking," he said, his voice low and unsettling. "My father's hold on you is fading, but there's still one more thing to do, Sade." Her eyes darted toward him, and a feeling of dread washed over her. "What do you mean?" she asked, inching away from him. Baudet's lips curled into a sinister smile. "To complete the process, there must be a transfer," he said, his words dripping with menace. "The magic won't fully release you unless there's a final act to seal it." Shade's pulse quickened as his meaning became horrifically clear. "No, no, you can't!" She scrambled to her feet, but Baudet grabbed her by the arm and pulled her back down with a force that knocked the breath out of her. "Don't fight it," he hissed. "I freed you from him. Now you're mine." The hut was filled with an eerie silence, broken only by the sound of Shade's quiet sobs. She lay on the floor, trembling, her body and spirit bruised. The act had been vile and brutal, a further violation on top of all she had endured. Baudet had taken what he claimed was his, and in doing so, he had left her feeling even more trapped than before. She slowly pushed herself up, her limbs aching as she tried to gather her strength. Baudet had fallen asleep nearby, his chest rising and falling steadily. She could still feel his touch, the weight of his body, and the darkness of his intentions clinging to her like a second skin. Shade's heart raced as she saw a small opening in the hut's wall. This was her chance. She couldn't stay there, not for another moment. She crawled silently toward the gap, her breath hitching as she squeezed through. Once outside, she broke into a desperate run, the cold night air biting at her skin. Shade's footsteps pounded against the forest floor as she fled into the darkness, her breaths coming in ragged gasps. The night was thick, the trees closing in around her like a cage. She didn't know where she was going. She only knew she had to get as far away as possible. The forest seemed endless, the branches clawing at her as if trying to pull her back. Baudet's voice echoed through the night, taunting her. "You can run, Shade, but you'll never be free of me." His laughter carried through the air, chilling her to the bone. She stumbled, falling hard against a tree, but forced herself up, fueled by sheer terror. She could hear Baudet's footsteps in the distance, growing louder as he searched for her. She had to keep moving. As the faint glow of the church's steeple emerged in the distance, Shade felt a glimmer of hope. She pushed herself toward it, the promise of sanctuary giving her a momentary surge of strength. If she could just reach the church, maybe, just maybe, she would be safe from him. "God help me," she whispered, clutching her chest. "I don't know what to do. I don't know if I'll ever be free." Shady threw open the doors of the church and stumbled inside, collapsing onto a pew. She looked around the empty sanctuary, the flickering candles and stained glass casting strange patterns on the floor. She breathed heavily, her whole body shaking. The oppressive silence of the church seemed to echo her despair. Even here, in this holy place, she felt the weight of Baudet's violation and the darkness that seemed to cling to her. A sound at the back of the church caused her to snap her head up in alarm. Bode stood at the doorway, his face a mask of rage. She fell to her knees, tired from running. "Even here?" she cried out, backing away. "You would follow me even here?" He stepped forward, his expression cold and determined. "Did you really think you could escape me, Shade? There's no sanctuary from the consequences of your actions." Just as Bode began to approach, the elderly priest emerged from a side room, his eyes narrowing as he took in the scene. "This is a house of God," he said firmly, stepping between Bode and Shade. "Whatever darkness you bring with you, it has no power here." Bode sneered. "You have no idea what she's done. She deserves everything that's coming to her." The priest shook his head. "Perhaps, but vengeance is not yours to enact, nor is it welcome here." For a moment Bode hesitated, his eyes flickering with a mix of anger and uncertainty. Then with a growl he turned and stormed out of the church, leaving Shade trembling in the back pew. Shade remained in the church, her body slumped as she wept uncontrollably. She had been violated and used, first by the Father and then by the Son. What had she become? She had lost everything, her freedom, her dignity, and the friendship she once held dear. The weight of shame and despair pressed down on her, suffocating. The priest approached her cautiously. "Child," he said softly, "you have suffered greatly, but there is still a path to redemption. It will not be easy and the road may be long, but there is no sin too great for God's mercy." Shade looked up at him, her eyes filled with hopelessness. "Can I ever be free of this?" she whispered. "Will I ever escape my past?" The priest's voice was gentle yet resolute. "Only if you believe you are worthy of redemption, and only if you take the steps toward healing. Forgive yourself and you may find that you are stronger than you know." The church bells began to toll, signaling the beginning of the morning service. Shady bowed her head, tears streaming down her face as she whispered a desperate prayer. She didn't know if she would ever be whole again, but for the first time in what felt like an eternity, she allowed herself to hope. As Shade reflected on all that had happened, the hard lessons she had learned began to surface. She recognized that her obsession with gaining what others had led her down a path of destruction. She had thought she could manipulate fate, but the cost was far greater than she could bear. What isn't earned cannot truly be possessed. She had naively believed in the power of magic to solve her problems. Now she understood that meddling with forces beyond human control only invites darkness into one's life. The cost of such interference had been her freedom, her dignity, and her peace. She remembered her friend deceit, who had always been there for her before she turned to dark paths. She now realized that true friendship is a gift that should never be taken for granted or sacrificed for selfish desires. Allowing herself to be manipulated had come from not valuing herself. Now, Shady understood that self-worth comes from within and starts with forgiveness. Reclaiming it was crucial for her healing. Shady had learned that while the past could not be changed, the future was still in her hands. Her story was not over. She could still seek redemption through sincere repentance and faith. Shade's journey is a reminder that no matter how far one falls, redemption is always possible. Her story serves as a cautionary tale about the consequences of dark magic, betrayal, and the choices we make. If you've ever needed a second chance, subscribe to our channel for more gripping stories that offer powerful lessons on life and hope.